Oh, yeah. Let's see if it's, I did.
Okay, it was
Yeah.
very familiar because I used one for my specific competition.
Uh-huh.
Exactly like it. So,
Oh, really? Yeah, I think so. Thank you. I guess it's not going to
Good
work.
morning, everyone. I think we're ready to go. This is we have the winners of the graduate student competition for the extension section. Really happy to have them present today, and they'll actually have a little bit more time to go through their presentation. So we'll probably do about 20 minutes and then 10 for questions for each. And I think Kate Fuller is on with us. Kate, if you're there and want to say hello, she is the wonderful person that has orchestrated and helped with this competition. So Kate, can you talk to us?
Yeah. Oh God.
Hi Kate, we can hear you.
Oh good. I'm not a feedback from my end. I will just hi and great job everyone, and I'll sign off.
Okay, well, great. So we're going to go in reverse order. We'll start with the third place winner today, Gerald Mashangi, and I'm going to let him take the floor.
Awesome. Thank you for attending my presentation, everybody. My name is Gerald Mashangi. I'm a PhD student at Kansas State University. So the title of this presentation is Dynamic Pro Forma Tool for Kansas Farmer Cooperatives. And this extension project was designed by the Arthur Kappa Center, and I shall refer to it as the center for the purposes of this presentation. Moving. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So the farmer cooperative landscape has been changing over the years. To demonstrate, in 1950, there were 10,064 co-ops. As of 2019, that number had declined to 1,779. So the question is, what's been happening? Well, cooperatives have been merging or being acquired. So although there are far fewer cooperatives around today, they're actually much, much larger. In fact, as of 2019, the total gross business volume came in at $203 billion compared to only $10 billion in 1950. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is, even though these co-ops are much, much larger, they actually have increased operational complexity. So in addition to having multiple cooperative locations, cooperatives may be offering multiple products and services. So you can look at these as separate entities, but in reality, they're actually interconnected. So when management makes a decision on one particular entity, it may actually impact other entities as well. What we're really interested in doing is actually identifying and measuring the financial impact of strategic decisions. But then why does that problem matter? Well, over the years, our center has been approached by cooperative CEOs, CFOs, and cooperative leaders that sit on advisory council. What they've asked us to do is to develop a pro forma financial tool that will help management make strategic decisions. In addition to that, getting this right and understanding the financial implications of these decisions is essential because cooperatives are an integral part of the agricultural supply chain. They're a major employer in rural America. And in addition to that, knowing these financial impacts will allow management to better balance the competing interests that exist. On one hand, you have the interests of the members, the farmers. On the other hand, because the co-op is still a business and needs to borrow money, they have to adhere to the requirements that are set by lenders such as CoBank. And lastly, if you're able to understand what the financial impact is, whether it's a decision on investment, you're going to be able to make more informed decision and improve that decision evaluation process as well. So just to get everybody caught up, what is a pro forma statement? All a pro forma statement is a financial model where you put in hypothetical data and it gives you a forecast of a future period of time in terms of how the cooperative would perform. Our objective was to develop and deliver a dynamic pro forma tool to help cooperative farmer senior leaders and directors in strategic planning sessions. So if you've got a pro forma tool, when would you use it and how would you use it? So imagine for a second, you have to make a big investment decision. Should you invest in a new grain shuttle loading facility or should you invest in a new fertilizer warehouse? When you enter this information in terms of the cost of the operation we're trying to invest in, when you put it in the tool, it's going to show you how it's going to impact the entire business. how it impacts profitability, how it impacts the needs of cash. Do you need to borrow more? So our target audience are Kansas farmer cooperatives, and in particular, its management at these co-ops. Our center began in 1984, and our task was to provide educational research and education to these cooperatives. We have relationships with 61 co-ops. These are all the co-ops in Kansas, and altogether they have 536 locations. So I'm going to briefly go over our logic model, and just to restate what the situation is. There's increasing operational complexity. So it's very difficult to manage some of these co-ops, particularly when it comes to making these decisions. And what we're trying to do is to be able to measure a financial impact of a decision that needs to be made by the cooperative management, beginning with the inputs of the program. This program is going to be supported by our center staff, stakeholders such as CoBank and the Kansas Cooperative Council, and the funding that we're going to receive to support it. Our outputs, beginning with activities, will be webinars, online training videos, and workshops. In addition to that, we're going to be traveling to co-ops and also helping them present the tool in strategic planning sessions as well, and disseminating any updates to the tool. In terms of the people that are going to be participating in the activities, it's going to be these leaders and directors, our center staff, CoBank, and auditors that are mainly in Kansas. Our outcomes and impacts are split into three: short-term, medium-term, and long-term. In the short term, we'd like our users to be able to conduct independent pro forma analysis and overall to improve their decision-making processes. In the medium term, with focusing on the directors, these are the people who sit on the board, to have a better understanding of the financial position of the co-op. You see the difference between people sitting on the board and the people actually running the co-op on a day-to-day basis is that the board members aren't as closely informed on a day-to-day basis because they're managing their farms. And a lot of the time when they come in, you have to understand there's a limited amount of time. So when it comes to discussions and deliberations, they're going to need to be caught up in a much faster way. I'll give you an example. I can easily tell you that our cooperative is doing well, right? And sometimes for a lot of people, it's like, okay, I trust you. But it would be much more helpful if they could actually see what is it that I'm suggesting they do. At the end of the day, the board has to approve any major decision. In the long term, we'd like for the users to have increased confidence on whatever decision they make. That is to trust the tool and use the tool and see how helpful it will be in these decision-making processes. In the long run, we'd also like to roll out this program regionally and across the country as well, and overall to strengthen the U.S. farmer cooperative system. Our assumptions are that this tool will be seen as useful and beneficial to the users. In addition to that, we hope we continue to receive support from our stakeholders. And lastly, because it's a financial tool, we are assuming that the users will have a basic understanding of finance and accounting, which they will. External factors that could impact our program could be the perceptions and attitudes of the people who are participating in our program. And another thing is the current state of the economy. This could impact their budgets and their ability to attend our extension program. And lastly, a big thing that could also impact our program too are policy changes. See, the tax treatment in a co-op differs from state to state. So Nebraska co-ops can actually have different financial implications that are set at the state level compared to a Kansas co-op. So the tool we've developed is focusing mainly on Kansas, but if a tax change was to be written up at the federal or at the state level, would have to update the tool depending on what the requirements now are. So our extension program goals are to educate and demonstrate how this tool can be used effectively in strategic planning sessions. And we're also going to provide online material for the users of the tool. And lastly, we're going to ensure that this tool is applicable and usable for our users. Our behavioral change that we expect to see are adoption of the tool and its use by the senior leaders and directors in these strategic planning sessions. And we'd like to see an increased willingness to query assumptions. If I propose a strategic decision, what are the assumptions that underpin that decision? What are the growth estimates? What are the costs that go with it? And when you put all that information into the tool and you see the outcome, which is the projections, do they look realistic? Are they feasible? The last thing is to see more informed decision-making. That is decisions that are driven by the data. And again, that increased awareness to realize and observe the interconnectedness of all these decisions across the entire co-op. Our learning outcomes again are to increase an independent pro forma analysis with the directives of a better understanding of the co-op and to improve and make the evaluation process a lot more efficient. Now, the information that comes out of this tool will be used to support or refute these decisions, assess whether the impact or the feasibility of assumptions. And lastly, given a set of competing strategic decisions, the tool will help the users identify the optimal decision, simply because now a quantitative element to it. Now, to develop the tool, we had to conduct a lot of research. So we began by looking at financial statement models that were being used by investment bankers and equity research analysts. Once we found these models, we had to translate them using cooperative accounting. Cooperative accounting is very, very different to non-cooperative businesses. So this took quite some time, but overall, what we're able to do is just make it applicable by sitting down with cooperative auditors who helped us with that. And then lastly, we conducted a lot of interviews with our stakeholders. These were the lenders, auditors, and cooperative senior leaders as well. Just to give you an overview of the timeline and what we had to do, the project began in early 2021, where we set goals and define scope with our stakeholders. By January 2022, we had a working model, and we drove out to Western Kansas and sat down with a few co-ops and presented the tool to them. And we got feedback in terms of additional functionality they would like to see. And we went back to K-State, spent a few months working on that. And by April, we had a final working tool. Now, what is in the tool? Well, it has 4 reports. The first is an income statement. And all income statement is a report that shows you revenues and expenses. The other is a balance sheet. A balance sheet is a report that tells you the position of, at a point in time, of your assets, liabilities, and equity. The cash flow statement just shows you your sources and uses of cash. And the last thing are key performance indicators. How did the co-op do over that period of time? And the performance indicators we use are what CoBank closely monitors. So what's good about that is when they see the output, they're going to be very, very familiar with it because they know that CoBank is always on their backs, making sure they hit those targets. So in terms of how this tool will work, it begins with the user entering the past 3 years of the financial history. Once that data has been input in the tool, they will then enter in those assumptions. How will the co-op grow? If you're focusing on grain sales, how will grain sales look like over the next 5 years? If you're thinking about investing in a new facility, how much will it cost? You can enter that in the tool. Maybe you need to pay down debt. Questions like that and how you think of proceeding can be entered in the tool. Once all the assumptions are put in, the output will be the projections over the next 5 years. So I've got an example to show you how it looks like. So what you're looking at over here is the schedules tab, and in particular, it's the growth rate assumptions. So what you can do is if you're a co-op that has all 3 services, selling grain, marketing, supply like fertilizer and fuel, and participating in commercial and wholesale sales as well, you can actually sit there and make your assumption for every particular projected year in terms of how you see it growing. When you enter in these assumptions, what's going to happen is when you're finished entering all these things into the schedule, the output will be the culmination of everything that's gone into it. Another example are the key performance indicators. So what you're seeing over here is the profitability ratios. And what I'm just going to highlight, which is very common, I'm sure many of you have heard of it, is return on equity. So what you can do with these key performance indicators is, if you're being a little too ambitious, what you can notice is if historically in the past 3 years, your ROE has been about 4%, maybe at a dip, we start seeing ROEs of 10, 12, 13%. You're gonna have to ask yourself, how did I get so high? What did I change that was so fundamental? And this forces critical thinking in terms of the decisions that are being proposed, whether you're being a little too ambitious or unrealistic in terms of what you plan on doing. Now, in terms of how we plan on delivering this program, we're going to have in-person and online education. In-person will be at Kansas State University, and we're going to be holding workshops. I'm going to integrate new sessions into our existing extension programs. So these include the co-op finance program and our leadership symposium. Online, we're going to have webinars, training videos, fact sheets, and conduct radio interviews as well. In terms of the platforms we're going to make use of in terms of delivering our program, we're going to make use of Ag Manager, which is our department's extension website. I'm going to host our fact sheets and our recorded webinars here. In addition to that, we're going to have radio interviews and podcasts. I'm going to be making use of Agriculture Today. And in terms of the actual tool, our fact sheets, training videos, all these will be hosted on our center's website. And lastly, we're going to make use of social media, and we're going to be making our announcement on that platform and also providing links to the outputs that we deliver. Now, our team and the responsibility that we're all going to share, it's going to be myself and Dr. Brian Brigham. We both are going to be responsible for designing and leading these workshops and presenting webinars and writing fact sheets. My additional responsibilities are going to be updating the tool and recording training videos, and also updating the tool's site as we make further changes. Dr. Brigham will be conducting the radio interviews, and he will also be traveling around the state, making presentations and strategic planning sessions. We do expect to encounter a few delivery challenges. The first one being that after each activity, there's bound to be questions. So as they come in, we're going to be compiling frequently asked questions. And what we're going to do is we're going to be posting those on our center site, making sure it's available for any user who may have similar questions. In addition to that, we're going to be available to answer any calls over the phone. And the last one are time constraints. This tool is very beneficial because it's different from a typical pro forma tool. The difference between ours is that the user can control multiple things at the same time. A simple pro forma is a straight line tool. So the idea is everything about the business grows with revenue. That means you're introducing trend. So for example, if you think on average, your crops going to grow at 2%, that means your assets, your debt, all these things are growing at 2%. You can imagine in reality, that's not how it works. Everything is different. So in terms of trying to educate these people on how to use the tool, we don't think it's realistic to think one day's workshop will be sufficient to cover it. So to supplement in-person education, we're going to make use of those online training videos so that the users can actually work on these things at their own time as well. And last, you can even think about it too, is we can only have these management away from the co-ops for so long. So it'll be very beneficial to have online training videos for them again to get through this at their own time. Now, lastly, is about evaluating the program's effectiveness. So for each of our activities, we're going to have pre and post surveys, focusing on the workshops, the webinars, and the training videos. And for the tool and measuring how useful it is, we're going to have a biannual survey where we're focusing on, again, the ease of use, its functionality, how is it perceived by the users, and the use cases. Is it being used in strategic planning sessions? Is management using it on a periodic basis? Another is just collecting suggestions on how we can make the tool better. We'll be asking the users of the tool and our stakeholders as well, such as COBAC and the auditors, because again, sometimes big changes come in from the policy view, or maybe from the lender's perspective, where they're feeling as if they need to tighten things up and focus on more robust outcomes for financial performance. And lastly, we're going to be monitoring the downloads and video views. We're going to be making sure we're seeing how many people are seeing our center site, going to Ag Manager, and also viewing our training videos. That concludes my presentation. I'd like to thank you guys for your time and attention. I'll take any questions.
If you said it earlier, funding sources?
COBAG, so our SAR Center has about $4 million that's managed, and it's all used to support our program. With this tool in particular, it's being primarily supported by COBAG. So we've had a relationship with them for a long time, and this was something that they asked us to work on. So we do expect us to continue to have support, but that's where the money typically comes from. And other cooperatives as well. Yes, Elsa. Yeah. Yes, we went to Garden City Co-op and we sat down with the CEO and the CFO. So we spent the whole day with them and we showed them the tool when it's still in its beta form. And they gave us a lot of feedback in terms of additional things they wanted to see. So for example, things like compounded annual growth rates. What they thought was important was to see how growth is changing over the past 3 years compared to what growth would look like in the projected 5 years. So feedback like that was provided by meeting down with these co-ops. Okay.
On the impact question, right? Do the co-ops pay anything for the use of the tool?
No, so this tool will be used by management. What co-ops typically do is they provide funding for the center every single year, but not for use of the tool. what our responsibility is to give back by providing tools and research for them.
So what, how do you anticipate the type of collaboration that will be needed to, if you want this to expand out into other states?
I think it's going to begin with us at least getting the word around and actually demonstrating how the tool is being used. In terms of rolling it out, I think we're going to have to work with other universities because, for example, at Oklahoma State, you know, the way co-ops are treated there is very different. And we know that experts that are at universities there who have a better understanding of being able to take our tool and make it more applicable to in Oklahoma, for example. So we're going to have to collaborate with other universities. So I feel as if as we roll it out, it probably will cease to just be a K-State tool only. It'll be a collaboration with other institutions across the country.
Any other questions?
This
Anna,
is
give me any questions for me? Okay.
hey. So I don't want back on my I'll make it quick. But it's such a cool project, and I'm in a state, Montana, where we don't have a lot of co-op resources and education. So this is more of a comment, not a question, but I do think that interstate outreach would be great. So if you can get the word out, I think, you know, some states have really great co-op education happening already, but there are a lot of states that don't. So anyway, great job. I also want to say Gerald was a competitor a few years ago. He did great then, and when I saw that presentation, I thought you will win this competition eventually. So congratulations.
Thank you, Kate.
on being one of the winners this year.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you, Gerald.
All right.
So much.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. So the second place member is Kelsey Hopkins.
Oops. Sorry.
You're going to use it right now. So we're not in any rush. We've got plenty of time.
Yep. All right.
Kelsey, before you start, go back into Zoom. You'll want to share.
Oh, dang, you're right. You are right. I have a Mac. Using this is not my forte. All right. Is it under more for this one? Okay. Oh, the screen. Okay, great. This is why you're the technical guy. All right. So yeah, I'm Kelsey Hopkins. I am a PhD candidate at Michigan State University. And I am presenting today on my proposed extension program. So disclaimer, no actual extension has happened yet. Meeting demand. Have you considered supplying religious communities? In particular, we're talking about the halal market today. So you saw in Gerald's presentation, he had a logic model slide. The way I've incorporated the logic model into my presentation is you'll just see on the bottom of each slide which chunk, which category is highlighted. So you should be able to follow along that way. If we're talking about supplying in the halal meat market, it's important in a country that doesn't have very many Muslims to understand what makes a meat product halal. So halal is a slaughter method, has nothing to do with any production prior to when the animal arrives at a slaughter facility. So some facilities might prefer to have organic or vegetarian fed animals, but that's not a requirement in any certification. So the first thing that makes this slaughter of an animal halal is it needs to be a permissible animal in the Islamic faith. So that would be no pork products, no carnivorous animals, and no dead meat. And when I say dead meat, I mean that at the time the animal is harvested, the brain and the heart have to be functioning, because when they are harvested, they need to die by exsanguination, which means the heart needs to, continue beating. The slaughter person needs to be a actively practicing Muslim or a person of the book. So a Jewish person or a Christian person who actively practices their faith. And that person, that's important about the faith because at the time of slaughter for each animal, they need to be verbally blessed, basically offering them up to God as a religious sacrifice. It is preferred in most certifications that the animal be hand slaughtered. Machine slaughter is also an option for poultry. And when that happens, you're going to have 3 of the 4 major veins or airways in the throat severed at least, but not the spinal cord or beheading the animal because, again, the heart won't continue beating at that point. Animal welfare is a key principle in Islam, so they attempt to make this process as pleasant as possible, with a single sharp cut with a knife to the throat. At the time of death, the animal needs to be healthy, so no diseases, no lameness, old age concerns, things like that. And also, there are prohibited ingredients in Islam that are not allowed in the cleaning of slaughtering facilities or in actual processing of the product. So no alcohol or alcohol derivatives, so like ethyl alcohol cleaning solutions, not a thing, and no cross-contamination with any non-halal products, so pork or something that just hasn't been certified. So there are several main problems in the halal meat market in the US today. First is that it is the 4th most fraudulent industry, which is surprising given how small it is relative to the others that have some fraud issues. That comes mainly because of transparency concerns. There's a plethora of labels and certifications in the market. In the US alone, there are over 25 different organizations that certify for halal. They all have different labels, they all have different standards, and they do not very clearly express those standards to the consumer. Globally, there's over 200 different organizations throughout the world. Despite that, demand is very, very high for these products in the US, and it's far outpacing supply. So if you don't know anything about Islam, and I didn't before starting this project, I learned a lot. Many Muslims believe that if they do not eat in a halal manner or a pure manner, that their connection to God and their prayers are not heard. So for someone who prays 5 times a day, it's very important for them to have that. So that keeps their demand steady over time. And then finally, next, because we have issues with supply, accessibility is very limited. So halal meat is not readily available in most parts of the United States unless you're already in a metropolitan area or city where populations are higher. And then finally, we have unorganized production concerns, which are going to be stunting the growth of the halal meat market now, currently, and in the future if some of these issues aren't addressed. So the target audiences for my program will be new and existing domestic small and very small meat processors, particularly those who already work with poultry, goat, lamb, and or beef or veal, not pork because it's not allowed. And so you can see from this pie chart on the right side that that's the vast majority of meat processors in the US as defined by the USDA size standards. Secondary groups of interest are policymakers, certification bodies who could, potentially help build a program, and any related community groups like Islamic centers, things like that. My extension program goals fall into 2 major categories. I've called them the 2 Eids. If you know anything about Islam, there are 2 religious holidays in it called Eid that involve the religious sacrifice of an animal. So I thought it was kind of appropriate to include them as an acronym. So the first category is research. That's the first phase of the project. So the goal there is to engage with current processors and community members in the halal sphere, identify what they know and don't know about halal meat and halal meat practices, and document that information to then be able to understand misconceptions or information gaps and address it in the outreach step. So for outreach, we're going to be educating current processors who are not normally in the halal sphere and policymakers about halal meat and how they can process it. And then we also want to inform them of related market opportunities for their organizations. And then we're going to disseminate that information in multiple platforms so that is accessible for anyone at any time who wants to learn more. We have some situational assumptions we have to consider. So first, we're assuming that the audience is valuing research-based information. Second, we're assuming that there's sufficient demand by processors and policymakers for information about consumer preferences. Third, we're interested that processors are interested in well-regarded certifications to utilize in their operation. And fourth, that consumers are going to continue to demand authentic halal products in the future. Additionally, we have some external factors that are going to impact the utilization of this program. So first, we know for a fact that there is growing demand for authentic halal meat. The US Muslim population is predicted to double by 2050. And additionally, non-Muslims are interested in halal products for animal welfare or cleanliness attributes that they value. Second, there's an overall movement in the food system towards increased traceability and accountability. So the certification and transparency is very related. Third, we have food security and accessibility being a pressing issue for many communities in the US and not just religious minorities. And then fourth, we know that sustaining cultural diversity is a key societal strength in the US. So being able to supply these products to a minority group is very useful. So the research portion of this project, E number 1, all of the data being used is coming from my USDA NIFA Educational Workforce Development Predoctoral Fellowship Grant. I am the PI on that project. So that is titled Avoiding Halal Meat Food Fraud, Consumer Preferences, Retailer Motivations, and Processor Practices. It's a 3-year program. I'm approaching the end of year 1 right now. So we're in the middle of data collection. But as you can tell from the title, I've broken the halal meat market into 3 major segments. We have consumers, so Muslim halal meat consumers. I've left non-Muslims out of this analysis for simplicity. Second, we have retailers, and third, we have processors. The focus of the research starts with concerns about food fraud. That's related to their preferences for certification and transparency, and motivations that both consumers and the supply chain have for demanding versus supplying different product types, so fresh cuts of meat, processed, frozen, things like that. And if those motivations are financial in nature, or if they come from personal, like cultural experiences or moral or ethical beliefs. And then finally, we have exploration into the production concerns and limitations that processors currently feel they face day to day in their operations. As I said, this is an ongoing project, so the data collection process is, I'm in the middle right here. So there are 2 major phases. Phase 1 was my qualitative portion. This is a mixed method study. Phase 2 is my quantitative, that's coming up. So in phase 1, in winter, December of 2021 through mid-spring of 2022, I was conducting interviews, in-depth semi-structured interviews with a total of 30 different agents from processors, retailers, and consumers in the market. That was based in the Midwest, 1, because Michigan State's name recognition, and 2, that's where I live, so it's a little easier to coordinate. Second, we have phase 1B, so that's the interview analysis, so reading through the transcripts, coding, coming up with major themes and ideas, and then using that information to design the surveys that are going to be going out in the fall. So that was spring 2022 through, actually right about now, I'm finishing that up right now. Survey distribution, once that's all passed by my committee, will happen hopefully in September, October of this year. And once all that data is collected, survey analysis and implications is going to happen later this fall, winter, and potentially into the spring. As you can see from the little star, my progress to date is I'm right in between phase 1B and phase 2A. So the information that I've gotten from my interviews, I've split into challenges that people feel that they're facing and some preferences or things they'd like to see in the future. So consumers, halal meat consumers in general felt that they had issues accessing the halal meat products that they needed with the proper certifications and verifying that those products were authentic. Because of that plethora of labels, it's very difficult to tell which is which. They also felt that they faced communication issues with retailers. So it was difficult to know where they could find the products they wanted, and if the products in store were actually, once they showed up, if they were had the attributes they wanted. For retailers, coincidentally, they also had communication issues. They feel that they can't accurately express what products they have available and what those certifications are to their consumers, especially new immigrants or people who have moved into the community recently. They also feel that they face serious supply shortages in the case that some days or weeks or months they're able to get all the meat that they need, and others they call out their supplier and it's not available. Now, the biggest thing that retailers expressed was profitability issues. And now this is multifaceted. We have issues related to just the cost of starting an organization to begin with. And in the Islamic faith, it is prohibited to be charged interest or charge an interest rate to someone when you're working with loans. So for many of these retailers who are small ethnic grocers, who are Muslims, getting financing to start an operation is very difficult in the Western world unless you can find what they call halal financing, which is in line with their religious beliefs. Also, halal meat is an expensive product, so you are not quite, then since you're supplying to a minority community that is often has immigrants or lower income people, the margin that you can mark up your product is smaller, so you have some issues there. Processors also face those exact same profitability concerns, compounded with the extensive cost to start up a processing facility with all the machinery and things that you might need. They also expressed facing input shortages where they couldn't always get their hands on, chickens or beef or whatever to slaughter. And then lots of issues with misinformation as to what halal meat is, how it's slaughtered in this post 9/11 world, and any biases that they face with like USDA inspectors and others who don't really understand the process and have potentially racial, cultural, or religious issues with it. Now, as for preferences, consumers, they would love to see more cuts and types of meat available to them. So right now, the majority of certified products on the market are fresh cuts by and large. You have some frozen products available, and some retailers will have like deli meat, things like that, but in general, not very accessible. Retailers, of course, would like to be able to supply those products to make some money. And processors have strong motivations and preferences for the hand slaughter method over the machine slaughter. They feel that it's more in line with their religious beliefs and that it's the more like ethically responsible method. All three groups currently use or want to see certifications. They'd like to see an even better and strengthening certification system in the US with a little bit more clarity between all 25 or so of those organizations. They also would really like to see halal meat that has other quality attributes besides halal, so organic, vegetarian fed, animal welfare concerns, things like that. So taking that data from interviews and then the data that will be collected in the fall, I've put together what the outreach program is going to look like, and I've selected some team members. So first is myself. I would be discussing study findings and implications and educating processors and policymakers of market situation and opportunities available to them. Second, in MSU Extension, we have Dr. Janine Schweihofer. She's an animal scientist, so she would be covering background animal science information, slaughter and processing methods, and going over any related funding options for like grants from the USDA or similar organizations to get small plants off the ground. Third, we have a representative, Fahad Khan, from the Halal Monitoring Services based in the Chicago area. That is one of the larger certification organizations in the US. And he would be explaining certification standards for their organization, the process that you go through to get certified, and how you would maintain that certification in the long term. And then finally, we have the processor panel. So that would be current halal meat processors throughout the US, Wolverine Pack & Co. in particular is in the Detroit area. And they would be answering questions from the audience about their own experiences entering the market and how they've continued to be successful. So there's several different methods and materials that we can use to deliver this information. First, and most likely the main method, will be the in-person presentations with using a PowerPoint like this one, where I would be giving key findings and implications, any supplemental materials, and then also evaluating the success of this program with pre and post surveys using something like Qualtrics. The organizations at the bottom of the screen are all, the 7 universities extension programs are all in states that have significant Muslim populations, either local in a particular large city, like for instance, in Wisconsin, you have Milwaukee area and Madison have a large Muslim population, or they just have a larger percentage in the state overall. So I feel that this extension program would be applicable for their area. And then the remaining 5 at the bottom are more national scope. And those are programs that have either already expressed interest in the outcomes of this project and would like to learn more, or I feel would just be a good fit for this information. Information will also be disseminated with written word. So we have magazines like Meeting Place and Meat and Poultry that have already published related information. We have the American Halal Council, which is like a consumer group in Florida. They have a blog and newsletters and things like that. We have the American Sheep Industry, and then we have Feedstuffs magazine as well. We can also disseminate information in a like asynchronous learning type environment. So we have Michigan State's D2L, which I'm sure is used by other universities as well, which is an online learning platform. We have YouTube, and we also have Cultura, and all 3 of those we can upload like seminars or instructional videos and things like that. And then finally, we have the option to disseminate information through university-specific resources. So that would be MSU Extension, MSU Ag Bio Research, and Michigan State University News. So this page here is MSU Extension's Animal Agriculture webpage. This is where I anticipate that related information would be posted on the extension page. I've broken the outcomes of this project into 3 major timeframes. So first is short term. So in the short term, the audience is going to be receiving information on the market opportunities available to them, education on halal slaughter methods, and access to resources to learn more. In the medium term, the audience will hopefully begin applying for funding if that's something that they need, obtaining certification, implementing the slaughter methods in their organization, and in the case of policymakers or community groups, prescribing informed policy. Altogether, in the long term, I anticipate the audience will accomplish increased profitability and financial viability in their operations, improve diversity, equity, and inclusion in the meat supply chain and in the U.S. overall, expanded accessibility and availability of these certified halal meat products, and enhanced market transparency. As with any program, there are some potential challenges, and I've thought up some solutions before we get to that. So first of all, like any audience, people are going to be very busy. So we're going to make these materials available 24/7 in that variety of different dissemination platforms. Second, we have these racial, cultural, religious biases that may influence decisions and policies that could be presented. So it's going to be our job then to inform and educate the audience members to make sure that they're making these choices with as much information as possible. And then finally, when you're making any changes to an organization or processing methods, there's going to be learning curves and logistical changes. So we're going to be available at every step of the process to provide resources and expertise as needed. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you. It is a lot. Go for it.
Yeah, so just come across your desk. I've just never heard full and so I'm fascinated by the fact that this popped up.
Yeah, that is a question that literally everyone I've talked to about this to has had. So long story short, I came to Michigan State. I am a knitter, so I make socks and sweaters and things, and I really wanted to work in the wool and cashmere markets as a result of that. And Michigan State sheep extension people were really interested in the meat side of sheep. So I was like, okay, I'll put the back burner on this wool stuff. I'm interested in it, but let's see what happens. And they were talking about kosher and halal certification in the state. The Dearborn area, Detroit area has a very large concentration of Muslims. So the halal certification, the kosher certification are very similar. And they were thinking of how to get processors on board with doing potentially both of those. So I thought about that for a little while, took a step back. I actually changed advisors in that time period, worked on a couple different projects. And then I was in a class one day with at Michigan State, we have three major groups in our graduate degree program. We have food and ag, which is what I'm in, environmental and resource economics, and then we also have development economics, which is our largest cohort of students. And so we have a lot of students that come from Muslim majority countries to come study at MSU. And I was talking with some of them in one of the classes I was taking for research design, and they were complaining about how difficult it was for them to find these products in the East Lansing area, and how being in the US, they often make the choice to be vegetarian or vegan because they can't be sure that they're eating appropriate products for their faith, which to me was fascinating. I mean, horrible for them because that's not a situation I would want to be in. And I also hadn't heard of halal prior to that pretty much. So I got really interested in there. I started to dig more into, why can't they find these products? I learned more about the food fraud concerns, all of these crazy certifications. I even tried just doing things like Googling myself to see if I could find products, and you can't. It's really, really difficult. So then it came to the point I was with my new advisor. I needed some funding options, and she said, Kelsey, apply for this grant. And I said, sure, I have 2 weeks to put it together. And I was running with this idea, and I was really excited and learning a lot about this faith that I don't know much about because we live in a Christian majority country. And yeah, here we are. Go for it.
So what, maybe you can talk about this, but you see a big demand for this type of educational program? And I'm there's a grant program that is coming out here in a few months that this seems like it would be very, very well suited for.
Oh, well, that's
So
exciting.
I'm thinking that just kind of thinking like demand for this. I mean, you mentioned a few other states, and obviously kind of live in Michigan myself. I'm familiar with that with Dearborn area, but are there other? How many processors are there? Kind of what's the demand that you would actually see for a book?
Yeah, so when I first started, this was probably back in January or so when I was getting into the interview portion of this project, we were contacted by NAMI and a couple of people who work in their niche processor area there, and they were actually very interested in setting up some sort of extension style program to introduce the processors on the West Coast to ideas with this. They had a lot in COVID, a lot of small processors opening up. I think there's the MPRIG grant that was through, I think, the USDA, that was providing funding for small processors and things to get started because of COVID supply chain issues. And she was very interested. Her name was Rebecca Thistlethwaite, I believe. And so she was very interested in this idea in these markets to present and try and recruit people in Oregon and Washington and California for this. So I think there is demand for it. I will also say that as part of this, because I'm outside of the Muslim faith, when I got into this area, I joined several online community groups that are interested in halal, that is pretty much all Muslim Americans, and I just kind of observe and watch. And the amount of like complaints I see from consumers who can't find the products they need, and people who are asking how they can start their own processing operations in wherever they live. A lot of them are down south or on the West Coast where there's not too much availability. So I think it's definitely an option. It's more making sure that people are aware this is a thing they can do. As they said, like, you don't know halal exists. We know more about kosher in this country because it's a more established market, but halal is its little brother that's also growing now. So yeah.
So there are any processors that went from being non-halal to halal.
Yes.
And then they give you that cost implication from updating and modernizing their.
Yeah. So there are a lot of processors that have tried halal and have left it. And there are some that have joined it. Now, the leaving it portion was because of anti-Islamic feedback from their larger community. So they published that they were doing halal slaughter, and they got a lot of they got a lot of angry customers basically telling them to stop. But for the ones that switched and then stayed with it, they said it's actually fairly easy to implement. Outside of those concerns about like not using an alcohol-based product to clean machinery, and then having the hardest part for them was having a Muslim slaughter person come in. Some of the certifications are okay with a person in the book. Some of the certifications require a Muslim because there are different beliefs within the faith what they want. So that, and it is because it's a hand slaughter method or a machine slaughter method, that can slow down, you know, how quick the line speed moves. So that can be a challenge. But the certification process, it's not too expensive. There are two, to my knowledge, there are two main certifiers in the US that certify for hand slaughter meat, which is what most of these processors are going for, because if you're a Muslim who accepts machine slaughter, you certainly accept hand slaughter. Hand slaughter is not always accept, people who accept hand slaughter don't usually accept machine slaughter. So doing the hand slaughter allows you to reach a larger market. Where was I going with this? So the two organizations that certify, one charges like a per pound rate. The other is completely free. So it's supported by Muslim community groups and things like that. And they're the ones that is actually based in Chicago, the one I talked about here, HMS. So they are very rapidly growing in the past 5 years or so. They've gotten a lot of donations and things from their community to, so they monitor at no cost to the supplier or the processor. Processor can certainly donate to them, and they would love that to happen. But for small processing programs that would like to get started, that's definitely very attractive if you don't have much capital. Yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned a considerable amount of fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Any consequences? Or is it pretty much business consequences of your customers finding out?
Pretty much just that. So the Muslim community is very, very tight knit in the US, pretty much because they tend to go to places where there's already community. So word of mouth, once they know that you're doing something wrong, within probably a few days, you're not going to have any customers. That happened in the case of Myanmar in Iowa. They bounced back a little bit, but Myanmar does mostly exports now to Egypt and the Middle East. But yeah, it tends to be, there are a few states that have some regulations that require like consumer right to know law type situations, where if you are conducting fraudulent activities that you might have some sort of legal penalty. But for the most case, it's not enforced, or there's no real ramifications. It's just, if your consumers know, they're not going to keep going to you, which is unfortunate, because if in the case of like the milk issue or a baby formula, if there's like poisonings or things like that related to food fraud, like that's there's more action that gets taken there.
Kate, did you have any questions? Anything to say?
Yes, thanks. Of course I do. So when Kelsey, you had a question, I think last month about how to include the logic model. Yeah. And I just think you did such a nice job of that. This is sort of I think a perfect example of really incorporating that into your presentation.
Thank you.
And then my question is, you've touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you sought out feedback or collaboration from members of the Muslim community in both your research question and design, as well as your outreach plan.
Yes, extensively. So I was actually, when I first learned that I was had received this grant, MSU put out some articles about it, and I got a lot of just connections on like LinkedIn, or people just randomly emailing me from what I thought were spam email accounts in the Muslim community who were really, really excited about this topic. So before I even started the interview phase in the qualitative study design, I was meeting with several certifiers, and in where I was living at the time, the Rockford, Illinois area, there was a mosque there. And I went into the mosque and I was talking with people. I talked with the imam there, that's the religious leader. And so I had many interviews and also informal discussions before I started thinking about how I wanted to phrase particular research questions and how I wanted to approach answering them. And then even after I put together the qualitative study, the whole purpose of my interviews was to continue informing myself of the issues that these people felt they were facing or things they'd like to see, so that when I get to the quantitative portion of my study, which I'm designing now, my research questions have continued to evolve and adapt to those changes.
Thank you.
So, halal financing.
Yeah.
What's that one?
That is a great question. From what I understand, I'm not an expert in the area. There are banks in the US that do have it. I think Citibank has a branch. The others are escaping me. There's a handful of like larger banking companies that have a branch that do halal financing, but I believe it is that when they give the money to the business, they actually get like a share or a stakeholder position in that company until they are able to like recoup that cost. So it incorporates the way that the bank can make money without a true interest rate. So I'm pretty sure that that's the majority. I'm sure there are other methods as well, but I think that's the way it's done mostly in the US.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Next, we have our first place winner of the graduate student competition, Hannah Baker. So Hannah.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Again, my name is Hannah Baker, and I'm a master's student in the Agriculture Economics Department at OSU. And today I'll be talking about my research and an economic analysis of patch burning, and then also the extension program that we've built around this research so that we can get it out to cattle producers. So just a little bit of groundwork and background, the situation and problem that is addressed by this extension program. So the use of fire has been suppressed over the last 100 years. And because of that, we see a lot of woody plant encroachment in the Great Plains and in Oklahoma on these rangelands. As you can see from this image that was taken from the Rangeland Analysis Platform app in 1984, that in this particular area, tree cover was at about 4%, and now in 2019, it's at 58%. So you can see that fire suppression has really caused a major issue with woody plant encroachment. And when that happens, when those trees take over, the amount of acreage in rangelands for cattle to graze decreases. And to control these larger invasive species such as red cedar, eastern red cedar trees, it usually calls for mechanical removal, which becomes very costly for producers to do. But once that mechanical removal is put into place, it's recommended to use fire to prevent those trees from coming back, because eastern red cedar is a non-sprouting tree. So once you burn it, it can't come back. But again, with that fire suppression, not a lot of producers are using it because fire has acquired a bad name in the last 100 years. So specifically, why is fire necessary in Oklahoma? So Oklahoma consists of over 15 million acres of rangelands, and on those rangelands we produce cattle, and that supports about a $3.5 billion cattle industry, which in turn produces over 30 million tons of beef products per year. So again, that goes full circle. When those rangelands are affected, we see a decrease in the cattle industry and also a decrease in beef products. So what is being done to counteract this woody plant encroachment problem? The Prairie Project is who we're working with this extension program in our research. And they're looking at what we call patch burning, which is splitting a pasture up into different sections or patches and burning one of those patches each year in a rotation, in contrast to what most producers do, which is not burning at all or burning an entire pasture in every 3 years. So during this research, they specifically were looking at it initially to look at controlling woody plant encroachment. But during this research, they found other benefits of patch burning, such as high quality forages, because cattle are naturally attracted to recently burned areas because the quality of that forage in that area is much higher. They also found that stockpiled forages in those unburned and ungrazed areas provided drought mitigation, because those cattle can fall back on the stockpiled forages that weren't burned, rather than in traditional burning. If it doesn't rain, that grass in that entire pasture is not going to grow. And then lastly, they've seen wildfire benefits in controlling wildfires, because if a wildfire comes up on those recently burned areas, it can slow down and even stop that wildfire because there's not enough fuel to carry it. So if all these benefits of patch burning exist, why don't we see more cattle producers implementing patch burning on their operations? And that is the question that this extension program and research is going to answer. Producers want to know, they have one main question when they're asked to consider making a change in their operation. What is it going to cost me, and is it going to be beneficial? So by providing this research through this extension program, we hope to see more producers at least potentially adopting patch burning. So moving on from that, just a little bit of an outline in my logic model for this project. So the situation I've kind of already briefly gone over, that the challenge is we don't know the cost of implementing patch burning. And so that's the opportunity for this extension program to provide those costs. Inputs will be from the effort, knowledge, and experience of myself, and then also as OSU faculty, and we also will be working with members of the Prairie Project. Activities will be to research these costs and then compare them to what producers are already doing with this traditional burning. Outputs from this research will include fact sheets, presentations, as well as field days and workshops for these producers to attend. And then lastly, from all of these aspects in research, we hope to see these outcomes in a behavioral change from cattle producers. So here's that logic model just as a whole image, just so you can have that in your head. And so I've already kind of briefly gone over situation. And then the assumptions that we're making from this extension program based on all these aspects I'm going to go through throughout this presentation are that the restoration of rangelands from patch burning will increase. And then also we assume cattle producers want to be profit maximizing. They want their operations to be profitable. And so through this research and extension program, by sharing this information, we hope to see a potential increase in the adoption of patch burning once producers see that it can be cost reducing and profitable. So who are we reaching in this extension program? While there are 4 main categories of cattle production all throughout the Great Plains and in the US, this specific extension program is aiming to reach cow-calf producers in Oklahoma. And we see that these producers are mainly older men who have herds less than 100 head, and 70% of them rely on that off-farm income. So that right there is kind of not discouraging, but cattle producers want their operations to be profitable on farm. They don't want to necessarily depend on that off-farm income. So again, through this research, we want producers to be able to have the option to increase that on-farm income and not have to rely on off-farm income as much. So the team behind this extension program is, again, myself, the extension leader, Hannah Baker, and I work closely with my advisor, Dr. Hannah Shear at OSU. She helps to facilitate communication between myself and the other departments at OSU, as well as the Prairie Project members. And then lastly, we work closely with Dr. Laura Goodman, who is a range extension specialist at OSU, but is also a very important member of the Prairie Project. And so we're working closely with her to get this economic research in with the beneficial research that the Prairie Project is already doing. And so just a little puzzle piece of all of us working together and our responsibilities. Again, Dr. Shear and I will be in charge of building these budgets and presenting them to Laura Goodman so that she can present them at field days and workshops that the Prairie Project is already putting on. And then we also work closely with Dr. Stan Fullendorf in the Natural Resource Ecology and Management Department at OSU to look at forage data and put a quantitative number with these qualitative forage benefits. And then also, lastly, we work with Dr. Peel and Dr. Raper to get this information out at extension meetings in a more train the trainer format. Okay, so again, the goals of this extension program are to quantify the benefits of patch burning, estimate the cost of implementing patch burning, and then compare our research to what producers are already doing in a more traditional sense of burning that entire pasture at one time. And then our overall main goal is to aid cattle producers in making profitable decisions. So going into the research a little bit, I've broken it down into 3 sections of burn cost, forage benefits, and feed costs. So first, I'm going to talk about these burn costs. We acquired these from a survey that was sent out and designed by the NRAM department at OSU. And we split those respondents into those who patch burned and those who followed that more traditional form of burning that entire pasture every 3 years. And as you can see, patch burning does cost a little bit more than traditional, but talking about that a little bit, so this is just the year 1 budget and estimated cost. So we anticipate that in year 2, 3, and ongoing years, those fire break construction costs as well as labor and fuel costs will decrease because you can burn into those recently burned areas, creating those natural fire breaks. So the cost of building those fire breaks will decrease. And then moving on to forage data. So this is split into 2 sections of forage quality and forage quantity. We find the forage quality aspects in those recently burned areas. Comparing that to traditional burned areas, they saw crude protein levels as high as 11% and total digestible nutrient levels as high as 55%. And then moving on to that forage quantity in those ungrazed and unburned areas where that forage is given the time to rest and accumulate over time, they saw over 4,000 pounds per acre in those previously burned patches. So that's where that drought mitigation really comes in. For if you burn a patch and then we have a drought, those cattle can fall back on that stockpiled forage, where in traditional burning, the entire pasture is burnt up. So there's no forage for those cattle to graze. So while that's lower quality forage, lower quality is better than no quantity at all. And then lastly, we have the feed costs we acquired from Dr. David Lawman at OSU. We use the price of a 38% protein pellet, which is around $308 per ton. And we feed at a rate of 1.95 pounds per day, which rounds out to about 37 cents per head. And so putting all those pieces together, we based this budget on the particular study done looking at cow-calf pairs on both patch burned pastures and traditionally burned pastures. The results of this study showed that body condition scores and weaning weights of calves did not differ between the 2 management styles, but a 40% reduction in supplemental feed requirements was seen in the cows, on the patch burned pastures. So that shows that these cows were able to maintain a body condition score on less feed, ultimately resulting in reduction of feed costs. And that's where this budget comes in, putting those 3 parts together. So first I want to talk about the burn cost again. So again, we see that it is higher than traditionally burned costs in the patch burning management style. But then we really see a major reduction in those feed costs because patch burning was used. We see over $1,500 in savings for those feed costs. And then ultimately that resulted in a little over $1,000 in savings for total cost. And then broken down into a cost per acre, we saw an $8.35 difference. Okay, so now that I've kind of gone over the research, how are we going to get this research out there to cattle producers? We're going to use these budgets and fact sheets to present, and we're going to have field days and presentations, and then ultimately these workshops where cattle producers can come in, use these budgets and numbers that we've estimated to project what patch burning could potentially cost them and their operation. So breaking that pyramid down a little bit further, we're offering these budgets and fact sheets that can be found at OSU Extension website, as well as the Prairie Project website. And the fact sheet goes in more detail of these budgets as well as the benefits, but it also includes an implementation process for cattle producers to follow, whether they're transitioning from that traditional management that they've been doing for generations and generations, or for cattle producers who are just starting out and are wanting to implement prescribed fire on their operations. And then moving on to the events that we will host will be field days and workshops and conferences. So the Prairie Project already incorporates and hosts several field days and workshops a year. But by providing these comparable budgets, we'll be able to host additional workshops and add to those workshops that are already being done. These field days occur on the 12 research stations and also the collaborating ranches that the Prairie Project works with. And the field days, they can come out, and we also have they invite youth out, such as 4-Hers and FFA members, to come out and look at these collaborating ranches. And the collaborating ranches is a big part of this because producers want to hear from producers, not necessarily from academia people. They want to see it actually working and being profitable for these producers. And then again, those workshops, they will be, producers can have the opportunity to be more familiar with the Rangeland Analysis Platform app, where they can plug in where their operation is and see the tree cover and vegetation density that's already there. And then again, using our budgets and the numbers that we've estimated to project what patch burning could cost them, and by plugging in their numbers of their operations, such as number of head, rate at which they're feeding, and the number of acres that they have. And then this information will also be presented at conferences such as the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association Convention, as well as surrounding states as this extension program grows. We anticipate to present at such as the Cattlemen's in Kansas, Texas, and Nebraska. And then lastly, from program outputs, we have social media and the website. So I've kind of briefly already discussed the Prairie Project website. So I want to take this time to present a little bit of demographics behind these media outlets. So for social media, the Oklahoma Lands Instagram handle, which is the OSU Natural Resources page, they reached over 800,000 people in 2021, but we've already reached that number as of 2022 in April. So we can see that the exposure of patch burning is growing and will continue to grow in the future. And then the same thing with the Prairie Project website. We reached over 5,000 viewers in 2021 and have already reached 7,000 viewers in 2022, with an engagement rate increasing up to 56%. Okay, so the outcomes from this information that we assume that we're going to see and hope to see from these cattle producers. So that research has already been done since 1964, researching the benefits of patch burning. And then we already see several ranches profitably adopting patch burning with those collaborating ranches that work with the Prairie Project. But by providing this missing piece of those comparable budgets and the cost of patch burning, we hope to see an increase in producers that are able to ask the question, could patch burning be beneficial for my operation? And then how we're going to evaluate this program are in three main ways: through a pre-workshop survey and a post-workshop survey, and then also by continuing to monitor those monthly and annual engagement rates of our social media outlets and website, and then also monitoring the rangeland analysis platform app. By when we see that growth of producers implementing patch burning, we can look at that app and see how the tree cover is decreasing in rangelands in Oklahoma, as well as the Great Plains region as a whole. And these pre-workshop surveys are to measure any prior knowledge that these producers may have of patch burning and the foundational principles that they need in order to implement this. And that's where that fact sheet really comes in. And then the post-workshop survey is to measure the effectiveness of our communication, as well as getting feedback from producers on what we can do better to make this more effective. And producers who attend these workshops and have already implemented patch burning on their operation will be asked if they would be willing to fill out a follow-up survey to provide their own personal production costs, such as if they've seen reduction in feed costs and benefits from that stockpiled forage. So here's that logic model again as a whole, checking off that I've already talked about all of these sections, and I've gone through those assumptions again that we assume cattle producers want to be profitably maximizing. And so through this research, we anticipate that producers will recognize that patch burning can be profitable and will adopt it. And then just some external factors that could potentially influence producers' decisions to adopt patch burning are high input prices, weather conditions, and cattle prices. And we really see all of these in today's cattle production, cattle industry, especially drought. Drought is terrible right now. So while patch burning may not be necessarily attractive to implement right now, there's a saying that during drought is when you plan for rain, and during rain is when you plan for drought. So if we can get producers thinking about patch burning and going ahead and putting that plan in place, when we do get that good rain in, they can implement patch burning and be ready for that next drought that may occur. And with that, I would like to open it up for any questions, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Good question.
Okay.
You might not have the answer to this, but I've recently heard quite a bit about traditional like Native American burning. And it's kind of like similar to some of those techniques, or
So before European settlement, Native Americans actually used this form of burning of patch burning because they used it to attract grazing animals such as elk, bison, and even cattle that they had. So this is not necessarily a new concept. The Prairie Project and then what we're doing is to really emphasize and bring back the use of prescribed fire, because fire is a natural event and it helps to, I don't really want to say rangelands can start over, but it kind of gives them an even playing field and can regenerate those rangelands for diversity in forages. And that ultimately plays a role in cattle production because those cattle can use the nutrients from different forages. And as well as if wildlife habitation is a goal of cattle producers and they want wildlife on their operations, those different category and patches that have different forage levels provide habitats for wildlife as well. But yes, Native Americans did use it.
Are you engaged? I think California is pushing that right now.
Is pushing the patch burning or?
Pushing getting Native Americans involved in the burning.
I have not heard that directly, but that would be a great thing. That'd be a great thing to do. Yeah.
How new of a concept is it for the typical person that you're interacting and educating?
So the research on it has been done for over 50 years, but the concept of implementing it for product cattle producers is pretty fresh. It's pretty new, because trying to get cattle producers to transition from something they've done for generations and generations can be very difficult. So that is why we're really pushing this economic impact, because again, cattle producers want to know what it's going to cost them. So by implementing this, we want to see more adoption of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty common. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. But the patch burning is fairly new.
Just kind of related to that, and how are you interfacing, like, because there seems to be resistance because of climate change, climate variability, the climate science, how, I mean, because I think that would be a way to really encourage or influence for producers' decisions.
Okay.
So like climate science, are you working like with any people at your university or other places on to help what we're looking for that would validate the patch burning?
Right. So the interim Department of Natural Resource Ecology and Management has done several papers looking at how patch burning is beneficial because of climate change. I am personally not kind of emphasizing that route. It is definitely a piece of the puzzle, but the interim department has definitely incorporated that into their research, and we're working closely with them to make sure that we incorporate part of that into our research.
I wonder if people measure the risk. So some years are not going to be amenable.
Right.
And so if that third year that no one's planning to burn their vouchers, that's stuff then they can't do.
Right. 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 Right.
And so I wonder if someone can like do a little thing every year.
Right.
You have a higher chance. And I don't know.
Yeah, we're actually, that's our the next steps of this research are to build budgets in the next few years, up to 5 or 6 years, because like you said, every year may not be the right scenario for burning, but with patch burning, it's very adaptive. So if you've burned that one patch in year 1, but say year 2 is terrible and you can't burn again, you still have that previously burned patch to fall back on with that high quality as well as that stockpiled forage. So yeah, that's definitely the next steps of this research. Right. Yep. Right. Yeah. We know climate change is a big issue right now. So patch burning is one of those ways that we can't stop it, but it's one way to mitigate the impacts of it. So, Grant.
Yeah, so easy question, but how do you make your slides? I thought they were.
How did I make my slides? I just played around until I found something I liked and then got the approval of Dr. Shear.
Yeah, so in PowerPoint or which?
Yeah, in PowerPoint. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
This change or add to the requirements for cross-fencing?
That is a great question. So another benefit of this is that you can take all your fences out. You don't have to get up 4 a.m., saddle horses, and move cattle around. These cattle naturally move because they're attracted. Yep. So I actually went out to the range experiment station in Stillwater with the interim department and range extension specialist, and I saw how it works. So they have it split up in their pastures, or the patches, excuse me. And there's little mowed lines where it cuts off that fire when they do burn, but there's no fences. I mean, obviously on the perimeter, but. So there's 5 main types of fire breaks. We have mowed lines, disked lines, and then dozed and blazed lines, and then natural barriers such as existing roads, creeks, and things like that. So obviously we want cattle producers to try and use those natural barriers to save money on fire break construction, But in patch burning, we see that a lot of producers are using mowed lines because you can go in there, mow it, wet it if you need to. And so that's what the range experiment station has used as mowed lines. But again, with the fences thing, those cattle are naturally moving, so you don't have to rotate them. So yeah. And as someone who has gotten up at 4 a.m. to saddle a horse and move cattle, I think that's fantastic. Are there any more questions?
Kate, I'm gonna let you, any comments, questions?
Oh, great. Yeah, I was just unmuting, so thank you. So yeah, Hannah, great job. I want to second, your slides look awesome. I think this year we had a huge step up in sort of visual presentation in all of the competitors, but you really did a nice job, and the topic is super interesting. This is also a great example of one winner passing the torch to the next, as Hannah Shear was one of the competition winners just a few years ago. So great job also, Hannah Shear. My question is about fire safety. So I'm in Montana. Fires are starting here, and it is definitely top of mind. So how did kind of fire safety and concerns about letting burns get out of hand come into the education component of this? And I'm guessing not quite as big of an issue in Oklahoma as it maybe is out here, but probably something you thought about. So thanks.
Yeah, so one of those implementation processes and first steps that are included in my fact sheet are to join a PBA, which is a prescribed burn association. And by being a part of that, they go through a training process before they can even conduct a burn on their operation. And then being a part of that is very beneficial because you can have the members come out and help you conduct the burn. Everyone works together. And it also goes into the cost aspect, because if you're a part of a PBA, you can share equipment. So say someone doesn't have a torch gun or a tractor to build those fire breaks, they can go to someone else in the member of the PBA and use that. And then as far as fire safety, there's actually been a study that mentioned being a part of a PBA is fantastic, because of course you'll have the fire department, you'll let them know what's going on. But it's also been seen where burn bans are put into place in a state, but they still allow PBA members to burn because they are so respected and have a reputation of keeping that fire under control. And also with patch burning, you're burning a smaller portion, so the risk of it getting out of hand and causing more damage than a traditionally burned pasture is a lot lower. I hope that answers your question, Kate.
Yeah, thank you very much.